Hey guys, today we are going to be talking about the Western Digital Black SN750 NVMe SSD drive. This is a PCIe Gen 4 drive. Usually this is rated for read speed. And over here we have the Ugreen M.2 portable SSD enclosure. So what this does is it takes the drive, puts it inside the enclosure, and you have an external drive that you can connect to your computer or laptop and get fast SSD speeds. Now guys, recently I was running out of hard disk space, or rather internal storage space on my PC because of all the videos I've been doing. I have stuck a 3.5-inch hard disk. It's a very slow 7200 RPM spinning drive just to back up my files. It has 4 terabytes on it, but it is good for archive, right? You can't actually edit off it because the random access speed is kind of low. So I had to do my editing with the files, with the video files on the internal SSD drive. So how do I get more SSD, more fast speed storage onto the computer? So here comes the Western Digital Black SN750. This is a PCIe Gen 4 drive. Now, I kind of made a mistake because my AMD Ryzen chipset doesn't actually support the PCIe Gen 4. The motherboard, which is a 550 motherboard, actually does, but the CPU itself doesn't open up the Gen 4 lanes. So I think I'm kind of limited in terms of the speed, but we'll talk about the performance in a while. First off, let me talk about this Ugreen enclosure that we are going to be sticking the drive in. Now, when you get the Western Digital, the box comes this way. It is a nice looking box. The design looks good. But if you open up and look at what is inside, actually, you're going to be looking at something which is actually very small, very thin, very flimsy. If I switch the camera around, this is the drive. And basically, this is all you're going to be getting from this whole box. If you look at this guy, it is super thin. I don't know how they fit 1 terabyte inside. I mean, technology advancement. So, well, anyway, I can't tell you too much about the whole technical specification of this guy because, you know, it's been a while since I touched all these. It doesn't really matter to me anymore. As long as I find something that works, the specifications don't quite matter to me. Now, one thing to note is the seller that I got this drive from. It is a seller that is based in Singapore, and I'm going to leave the link to the Instagram account as well as his online store on Shopee in the description down below. So if you are interested, you can buy this SSD off this specific seller. This came from the seller, and I have to say, for full disclosure, this is a sponsored drive. I will say that if you're going to be getting these SSD, they're probably likely to be very, very similar whoever you're going to be buying them from. But one thing to note, when this set came through, it came with extra stuff, right? It came with a screwdriver, it came with some bands, it came with a thermal paste sticker, and it came with some spacers for you to mount it to your motherboard, right? In case your motherboard doesn't come with that. And the Western Digital Black SN750 didn't come with the spacers either. And it came with this particular heat sink here, which I thought it was a very nice touch. So I reached out to the seller, and he has confirmed that yes, they are providing this heat sink for anyone who buys off their Shopee store. So it is something that is on top of what Western Digital is providing. Now, the other thing that is of interest here is this Ugreen M.2 portable SSD enclosure. This is a 10 Gbps USB-C compatible, all right? So you should be using a USB-C to USB-C cable that is at least capable of USB 3.1, which means to say it will transfer 10 megabits per second, right? If you are using something else that has USB-A on the other side, you may not get the full transfer speed. You'll probably hit about 500 Mbps and you'll be stuck there, right? So this is the correct cable that we'll use. Now, the Ugreen actually does come with a cable 50 centimeters long. Now, the other thing that you have to take note of, it says tool free here. Now, what is tool free? Tool free, if you look at what this rubber thing here, it actually allows you to mount the SSD inside without having to use any screwdriver. So this may not be necessary unless you're trying to mount it on a motherboard where you need to loosen the screw that is already there. But you know, everything is here provided. Now, what do? You pop this SSD, line it up into the B key here, push it in, click, and you push it back down. Move the rubber stopper here. So just swivel it around, and the disc is secured inside this enclosure. It is pretty light as well. Now, let me just give you an idea of what this weighs. I have a scale here. Turn it on. Okay. Drive inside with the enclosure. It is 58 grams, right? Okay, closing into 59 grams. Now, this particular heat sink here, which is provided by the seller for the Western Digital Black SN750, interestingly, just so happens to fit, all right? And you are able to slide the enclosure over just snugly without any problems at all. So now the whole thing will weigh just a little bit more, at 57 grams. So you're looking at about a 9-gram heat sink, and this itself is very light, very handy. Gives me a lot more confidence that you are able to hold this in your hands without slipping out. It is actually pretty comfortable. Now I have another drive here. This is a Rocket Pro from Sabrent. It is similar in performance. I'll talk about the performance of this Ugreen SSD enclosure with the Western Digital Black SN750 in a bit. But, right, first, the weight. This is at 67 grams. This particular guy here, oh gosh, it is 152 grams. And in terms of weight, this is more than twice, 2.5 times the weight of what you will be getting with the Ugreen SSD enclosure coupled with the drive here. Now, the other thing that you have to take note is that this Rocket Pro drive is completely sealed. So there's no way you can open up, no way you can take out the drive. Whereas for this, you are able to remove the drive and plug it directly into your laptop or the PC, most likely PC given the format of this at a 2280, meaning to say that it is 80 millimeters, 8 centimeters. So this will likely go into a PC motherboard unless your laptop supports up to 2280. Okay, so I'd like to talk about the performance of this drive in this enclosure. But first, I'd like to step you through to my whole thinking process on how I actually landed on this particular solution. All right, so if you look at what I talked about earlier in the show, I said that I had an internal hard disk. This is a HGST, and it is 4 terabytes in size. Now, when you do a this test, you'll see that the read speeds maxes out at about 144 megabytes per second, and the write goes up about 143 megabytes per second. So not the speediest, but the problem with spinning hard drives is the fact that the random access speed drops tremendously. And over time, when you use the drive, your files are going to be all over the place, and the drive head has to seek, right, to find the right file. So the latency is high because it has to spin and it's got to move the head to the right spot. And the problem is that the random access speed makes it so slow, right? It's so slow that you can't actually use it for video editing purposes at all. So for this drive, it is more like archival and backup. But the problem with putting a hard drive into your computer casing is that whenever you turn on the computer, it is active, it is spinning, and it keeps clocking up the hours. This drive has about 27,000 hours on the drive already. That's turning on 24 hours a day for more than 3 years continuous. So I thought about, what about an external hard disk, which is very, very cheap nowadays. Now, this drive is a very small, okay, here you go. This is a Seagate 7mm, very, very sleek, very thin. It has a SATA interface that goes to this, and this is a micro USB, right? Now, the speed is limited, right? It's not very fast at all. The drive is 5400 RPM, and you can see, right, that the read speed is capped at about 85. The write speed is probably capped at about 90. So not the fastest drive. And on top of that, the random access speed, it is terrible as well. It is sub 1 megabytes per second. So, to store something for safekeeping, for backup purposes, maybe. But as a daily drive, no, I don't think this is going to work very, very well. Now, the next drive I'm going to pull up here, all right, this is a Samsung Evo 850 internal SSD. Now, this drive goes through the SATA interface. It is not the modern drive that we are used to, but it is still a pretty speedy drive, and it's directly connected internally to my PC, to the motherboard, right? And you can see, right, the read speed goes up to 553 and the write speed goes up to 530 megabytes per second. So pretty impressive. And more importantly, you're not looking at single digit Mbps random access speeds anymore. You're looking at 398, almost 400 for read speeds, random access, and for random write, you're looking at 370 megabytes per second. So it becomes a very viable drive for video editing. The thing is, if you look at this drive, this is a 500 gig drive, so not the biggest drive that I have lying around. And again, it is connected internally. So in terms of transfer speed and everything, it is great, just that it is turned on all the time. And I've clocked up some hours on this. This is a pretty old drive, which I have actually stuck in a PlayStation 4 before. Now, next, we will move on to the Western Digital Black SN750 in the Ugreen USB-C enclosure. Now, I did put in the heat sink, and it managed to bring down the operating temperatures when I was busy copying and testing the drive from about 44 degrees Celsius down to about 38 degrees Celsius. So the heat sink does work. Thank you for sending this heatsink along. I think it is very useful. So very nice touch for whoever is selling this. I'm linking down in the video description below, so make sure you check that store out on Shopee for those of you who are in Singapore. So once I've installed the drive into the enclosure, I did a test using certified cables. This is a USB-C to USB-C. It supports full speed. I've tested it before. I connected it directly to the Thunderbolt 4 port on my motherboard, and I did this test. So if you look at this test here, you're looking at more than 1 gigabyte read speed and more than 1 gigabyte write speed for sequential. So pretty impressive, right? Something that is this small and the cost is low. I get a 1 terabyte external drive in an enclosure like this, which is pretty speedy. But when you look at the random access, right, it clocks in at about 131 megabytes per second transfer speed for read and 137 megabytes per second for the write speed. Not as fast as if you were to mount the drive internally, which then begs the question, what if you mounted this Western Digital Black drive directly into the motherboard? Now, my motherboard supports Gen 4 PCIe, but my CPU, unfortunately, which is an AMD Ryzen 4650G, does not support Gen 4. So I think my speed is still kind of capped because Western Digital says that this guy will clock in at 3,600 megabytes per second, but I'm not getting there. Let's take a look at the speeds that we can be getting. If you look at this chart here, I'm looking at the Western Digital Black SN750 in the NVMe Gen 4 slot in my motherboard. So this is now internally mounted, and the read speed is in excess of 3,100 megabytes per second. That's copying 3.1 gigabyte per second. You do a 10 seconds read, it reads 31 gigabytes of data of this drive. It's just mind-boggling. Again, maybe I'm not used to seeing this kind of speeds. And if you bought the new MacBook Pro, if you bought any of the newer Gen 4 PCIe SSD, you are probably going to be looking at 6,000, maybe 7,000. But one thing to note is that when you push the speeds on these drives, the internal temperature actually shoots right up. So you will get 50 over degrees Celsius on these drives if you are doing some really heavy copying. And once the thermal envelope is breached, it actually does throttle down the speed quite a bit. So what you have here is before the throttling, you are looking at very amazing speeds. Even for the random access, it is much faster at 563 and 418 for read-write respectively. I'm going to stack everything up so that you can do a direct comparison. This is the sequential read and write speed. So the orange bars are for read and the gray bars are for write. Now all the way to the left, you'll see the internal 3.5-inch hard drive, and that is clocking in about 144, 143 for read-write. And the Seagate 2.5-inch external drive is clocking in at 89, 90 megabytes per second for read-write. So not very impressive at all. But the moment you hit the SSD, and this is an old SSD drive based off the SATA interface, you see the Samsung Evo 850 clocking in at 553 for read speed and 529 for write speed. So pretty fast, pretty speedy, directly connected to the motherboard. Now, when you go on to look at the Western Digital Black in the Ugreen enclosure, it breaks the 1 gigabyte per second transfer speed for both read and write. When you stick this Western Digital drive directly to the motherboard, and mind you, I'm still running at Gen 3 speeds, it exceeds 3,100 megabytes per second and closing in on 3,000 megabytes per second for the write speed. Just look at the chart, and this thing is linear. You will see how much more performance you're getting out of the Western Digital Black. The next chart that we're looking at is for random access. So previously, we were looking at the sequential, which is pretty speedy. Now, for random access speed, the first two, the 3.5-inch hard disk mounted internally and the 2.5-inch hard disk mounted externally, they are a joke, right? You're looking at 2 megabytes per second and 1 megabyte per second respectively for both drives. So I kind of don't want to talk about them. Now, what is interesting here is if you look at the Samsung Evo 850 mounted internally, the random access speed is actually pretty high, closing in on 400 for both read and write. So what it is telling me, when you're comparing to the Western Digital Black mounted in the SSD enclosure, is that the enclosure actually brings the random access speed down considerably, right? Whereas if you look at the sequential, the drive actually performs better sequentially, even though it is external, as compared to the older SATA interface mounted internally. If you look at this random access, the Western Digital Black in the Ugreen external drive is going to suffer a little bit. So it drops all the way down to about 130 odd for read and write speed. But the moment you plug the Western Digital Black SN750 into your motherboard directly, you will see the random access speed shoots up to 564 and 400 over megabytes per second for read and write respectively. So if you ask me whether I'm going to be happy with this drive, putting it in the enclosure and, basically carrying 1 terabyte in my hands, I will be happy. This combination gives me 1 gigabyte per second transfer speed for both read and write. So backing up my video files, transferring my video files from the computer to the laptop to the NAS even, right? It's going to be really, really quick, at least, 10 times faster than transferring over LAN to the NAS for backup. So just some sharing with you on some of these stuff which are not audio related. I hope it helps you. I'm very sure everyone has a computer, has an access to a laptop. If you're on my channel, if you're playing around with audio stuff, you're playing around with the Sonos stuff, then definitely you have some requirements for storage. And this is my recommendation for the day, the week, my recommendation for external storage, you can build a relatively inexpensive drive that really has high performance, and when you need to, when you can actually pop up the drive and stick it into your PC or your laptop for a really high performance drive. So I'll see you in my next video.